Hey guys, Andrew Henderson, nomadcapitalist.com here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, getting ready here to launch one of my new homes here in Kuala Lumpur. I'm back, I'm excited. This is not the home, by the way, this is the hotel. But wanted to talk about citizenship-based taxation in the US and wanted to talk about something interesting that I learned and my thoughts on this as we head into a new year with tax reform fully underway, what it means for you if you're a US citizen. So my editor and some other US citizens were on social media talking about what are the requirements for US citizens to pay tax. And she got a dialogue going with a lot of folks who didn't even know that if you lived overseas, you needed to file a tax return, even if you own nothing, that you need to report your foreign bank accounts, even if those aren't really offshore bank accounts, even if you're just living in, let's say, Mexico and you've got a bank account in Mexico, or you're living in here in Malaysia, you got a bank account here in Malaysia. Probably, a lot of people who are US citizens have bank accounts where they live, and it's not because of these offshore fat cats. It's because they need money to pay their rent or their mortgage. And so a lot of people reading this thread didn't even know. And there were some people even who were saying, I was looking at going overseas, but actually I make too much money and I'm not going to be able to do it now because I didn't realize I still have to pay taxes. I don't live in the US, I still have to pay. A lot of people didn't realize that, and there were a lot of myths and a lot of false assumptions there that I went through, and a couple of them made some corrections on. For example, there are ways to legally reduce your tax if you live overseas. Tax reform made it a little bit more difficult, but there are still ways to do that. You can live overseas. You can do all this stuff legally. You can get the end result that you want, but it's more difficult than if you were Canadian, Australian, whatever else. And so people were saying, this is ridiculous. Why should U.S. citizens have to pay tax? And they said this should change. They should make some efforts to change it. And I wanted to give you the number one reason why I think, having just seen tax reform pass and have been watching politics for my vast majority of my 33 years on this planet, ever since I was 5 years old, why citizenship-based taxation will never go away. And why if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to be overseas, especially if you're a high earner, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. In this last tax reform, there was talk that the U.S. may go to a residence-based taxation. In fact, the U.S. basically went to the worst of both worlds, which was territorial on the corporate level and remaining citizenship-based on the personal level, which basically means you and your company are screwed, but you're going to stay screwed, but now your company's got more requirements too. And now it's going to be more difficult to do business on the company level, even if that just means you're a guy living overseas with the company. And there was some discussion at one point that, hey, residency-based taxation was going to become an issue, or even that territorial-based taxation, which I never really believed, but that was out there. But basically the discussion was, should the U.S. be a residence taxation country, which would have meant that if you lived in the United States, you paid. If not, then you basically followed the tax non-residence procedures, which I imagine would have been similar to those of Canada, Australia, the UK, whatever. And it would have made it tougher for some people to spend a lot of time in the United States, but it would have been a lot more fair. That basically got brushed to the side, and I remember groups like Americans Abroad were pretty upset about how they were handled because they thought at one point they were making some traction. They thought they were making traction when Bernie Sanders said that the U.S., to his credit, he's an honest guy, he wants to be like Europe. He said, hey, let's be like Europe and have residence-based taxation too. So they thought that maybe the tide was moving in that direction. It did not. And basically in order for President Donald Trump and for the Republican Congress to get a quote-unquote win, because they love to win, they love winning, they got this quote-unquote win, and it ended up causing a lot of damage to people who are overseas. If you were going to get citizenship-based taxation repealed, that would have been the time. The last tax reform was 31 years ago. And the way I see it is that U.S. politicians really just drop in things that screw over the average business owner into each bill. They dropped in FATCA into some random bill. They really drop in things that help people. But here's the real reason why I think you'll never see citizenship-based taxation, and now I'm pretty confident of it, or why you'll never see it repealed. And I'm very confident of this, seeing what just happened with this big tax reform push. Imagine these, now the Republicans are going to get crushed in 2018. They're going to lose control of probably both houses. This is not a political show, but that's the reality. Imagine, now you can already imagine the negative ads against Republicans who passed this tax reform this year. Whether they would have passed tax reform or not, it would have been a referendum against Donald Trump, who has a rather, it's a lower than 50% approval rating. And it's just the odds are against them. But imagine, to add insult to injury, whether it's this year, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever, imagine the ad saying, so-and-so, your congressman, your senator, voted to end taxing fat cats who go and live overseas. And they'd have pictures of, like, some playboy in a beach with a bunch of, like, busty bombshells, and they'd have, some guy in a hot tub, and they'd have, like, a guy in a private jet. That would be the ad. Remember what they did to Mitt Romney in 2012? Everything was about him on his jet and, this and that. Imagine the field day that people would have against any member of Congress or Congress who said, who voted to get rid of citizenship-based taxation. They would just spin that into basically, he's helping the millionaires and billionaires who want to go live in Monaco, want to go overseas, and they'd say, how dare you make it easy for these rich people to avoid their tax-paying obligations? That would play beautifully, whether it's true or not, whether it's fair or not. I mean, the reality is most of the people who are sucked into this FATCA, FBAR, tax filing nonsense, exit tax nonsense that they renounce, are just normal guys who go and live in Canada, go and take a job in Switzerland, go and do whatever. I often use the example of the guy who runs a bank in Abu Dhabi who just pays a fortune in tax because he's over the limit. I mean, that's the average guy. Those people weren't leaving because they wanted to pay less tax. They got a job offer. Maybe some of them couldn't get a job offer because the United States economy is crumbling and it's not looking good in the next 10, 20, 30 years, despite what the stock market may be doing this 1 year. The fundamentals are against the United States. So a lot of people in the United States are going to need to go to other countries to find jobs the way they have historically from Spain, Ireland, etc. But nevertheless, whether that's true or not, they would look at, guys like me who travel around, who like to fly in business class, who like to stay in nice hotels, and they would say, hey, you're a person who's living in, Henderson, Nevada, and you're miserable and you can barely pay your bills. How come this rich guy gets to go and live in Malaysia and not pay anything? Nobody would care that those people aren't using the services, they're not getting any benefits, they're just basically leaving the country and doing it. That's why it'll never happen. The politicians, because somebody in this social media thread said, well, they could easily make the money that they get from citizenship-based taxation. I don't know, maybe. My argument would be a Bernie Sanders argument, amazingly enough. I agree with Bernie Sanders economically and almost nothing, but I would say, yeah, sure, you know what? The United States is $20 trillion in debt. They've run up the credit card. Both sides have done it with the wars, with the social spending. Yeah, let everyone who wants to still live there pay more. Why should the rest of us pay more? Sure, raise tax rates. Why not? You probably have to. And then let people opt out if they want. But that system is not really going to work because it just wouldn't be politically expedient. It would never work politically speaking. And so that's why you'll never see the end of citizenship-based taxation, because politicians can't make it the votes. You can see with everything they do, it's all about getting the votes. They want to stay in power. The idea that the United States is not a corrupt country, it's actually a relatively corrupt country, considering who finances all this stuff. And it's kind of funny that the most capitalist guy on the planet is now taking this leftist position about how money in politics has corrupted everything to where you can't get any kind of reasonable representation, even if you're kind of a low-level rich guy. But the bottom line is citizenship-based taxation. People have been asking, Andrew, you think they'll repeal it? I've historically said no. Everyone else has said no. The only people who think that maybe they will are the advocacy groups who That's their reason for resisting, is to overturn it. And now I think you'll definitely not see it, and I think that we understand now why you won't see it. Definitely, if you are a U.S. citizen, go to nomadcapitalist.com. Lots of resources there on how you can put together your offshore plan, get some help. Also, make sure you subscribe here on YouTube for the latest. Lots of great videos coming out in this year to come.